Okay, folks, sorry about the glitch in the matrix. Seems as though my main internet connection, that provider, is offline, so I had to quickly switch to the secondary provider. It should have happened automatically, not sure why it didn't, so I do apologize for that. I see most of the persons are back online. So I guess we can continue. I just wanted to ask participants the point at which we dropped off. I believe I finished this slide, the mobile HF antenna systems, and was about to switch onto solar cells. So could I just have persons in the text box indicate if you were able to see the full mobile HF antenna systems and then I had switched to solar cells? Or did it stop halfway there or before? So I just want to know if I can, do I need to repeat mobile HF antenna systems or do I, okay, so I was in 10 when it dropped. Okay, right, so it dropped here. All right. Okay, gotcha. All right, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the feedback. So I will just redo slide 10. Do I need to redo slide 10 or was slide 10 completed? Okay, so I'll go ahead and, all right, second point. Thanks a lot, really appreciate it. Okay, so I'll pick up from the second point on slide 10. Thank you so much. Again, apologies, participants. These are the challenges that sometimes we have. Okay, so let's go again. Right, I think just about everybody is back on. Right, so continuing, we were saying that sometimes in mobile HF operations, we need to be mindful that there's a limitation when we go mobile. Our base station antenna on the right-hand side, maybe that's a 20-foot long antenna, can't really put that on your vehicle. So you have that limitation where the HF equipment has to, the antenna itself has to be much smaller, much shorter. So that's one of the limitations. But another disadvantage that we encounter in respect of our mobile HF usage is that the bandwidth of the antennas may be very limited, because remember, it's a much shorter antenna that we're using as opposed to a full-size antenna. And we may find that apart from the resonant frequency, when we shift a little left or a little right of that frequency, the SWR might become very high, or we may have a limited range of frequencies of operation given the much shorter antenna that we have. When we have that longer, physically longer antenna on the base station, for example, we can use more frequencies, get the radio, the system to be more resonant or resonant across a wider range of frequencies, and we call that the operating bandwidth. So that's a limitation for the exam that we need to be aware of, that it's a disadvantage of mobile antennas because they are shorter than the equivalent base station full-size antennas, and therefore the operating bandwidth can be very limited. So we need to know that for our exams. So let's continue on to the next slide. All right, so we are sticking to the theme of mobile HF antenna systems. And when manufacturers manufacture antennas, because the mobile HF antennas need to be as short as possible, one of the techniques that is used to shorten physically an antenna but ensure that it is electrically lengthened. In other words, it will be resonant on the frequency. So you're making it as long as it needs to be to match the wavelength. So it can be resonant on the frequency you want it to be. But you want the antenna to be physically shorter. What they use sometimes is called a capacitance hat on the antenna. And that causes the antenna to be physically shorter, but it is electrically equivalent to the wavelength that you need it to be resonant on. So a capacitance hat is one of those features that you will find in these mobile antennas. You can find them on base station antennas too, but they may use them to shorten the antenna physically so you can operate on very long wavelengths or low frequencies. We also have another feature of mobile antennas. You tend to see them. Look at any antenna and you may very well find either a beveled or rounded edge, or you'll have these things on the end called a corona ball. It may look like what we're seeing on the screen here, or it may look like a little sphere that is on top of the end of the antenna. There may be a little set screw that holds it in place. That is called a corona ball. And what it is used for is to reduce the RF voltage from discharging at the tip of the antenna. It makes it safer. So what you're really looking for is this type of object. Just look at any mobile antenna and you will probably see something like this. And it is used to dispose of that charge at the tip of the antenna and decrease the voltage. So when you look at the mobile antenna, you will see this little feature called a corona ball. And you need to know that for the exam because it's reducing the RF voltage discharge at the tip of that HF antenna while you are transmitting. So you need to know that part for the exam. Okay, continuing. So for amateur radio, we need to power our equipment somehow. And we showed that we can power our equipment via power supplies that we plug into the wall. We showed that we can power equipment via batteries in cars, for instance. However, we also can power our amateur radio equipment using solar cells. And we need to be aware that a solar cell can take sunlight and convert it into electrical energy or electricity, and that electricity can power our equipment. We'll come to a slide in a little while that talks about solar panels. But we have solar cells, and how the solar cells work, the process by which sunlight is changed directly into electricity when the rays fall onto the panels is called photovoltaic conversion. And we need to know that for our exam. You have the sunlight that falls onto the surface of the solar panels, and because of the properties of solar panels, it causes an electron flow in the circuit, and that process by which the conversion is done in the solar cell is called photovoltaic conversion. The other thing we need to know for our exam is that voltage, typical voltage or the approximate voltage, what we call open circuit voltage that you can find for a solar cell is approximately half of a volt DC or 0.5 volt DC approximately. So we need to know that for our exam. Each solar cell is 0.5 volts DC open circuit. But of course we can put many solar cells together to form a solar panel. So when we stack it up together like this, we form a solar panel. And we can use such a solar panel connected to storage batteries like we are here and charge up these batteries, and we can use this to power our amateur radio equipment. But for our exam, we need to know that if we're doing that, we're using these solar panels to charge up our batteries. We need to know that we should put in a series diode that's connected between the solar panel and the storage batteries. And the reason we use this is to prevent the batteries from discharging, let's say during the night time or the evening time, or when there's little or no sunlight. We don't want the batteries to become discharged. We don't want the power to be reversed and go now into the solar panel. You want it to go one way. You want the solar panel to always charge the batteries. You don't want the batteries to somehow power the solar panel. So the way to do that is to use a series diode between the solar panel and the battery storage. So we're talking about alternative power, alternative energy. We talked about solar power, but what about wind power? Well, yes, amateur radio operators also use wind power, or we can use wind power to power amateur radio equipment. So you have a wind turbine, you have a charge regulator controller, you may have a battery, you have an inverter and power and so on, right? But when we talk about wind turbine, we need to be aware, or wind power, we need to be aware that there's a disadvantage of using wind power as a primary source for an emergency station. That disadvantage is that you need a large energy storage when the wind isn't blowing. When the wind isn't blowing, if you don't have that energy storage, you will not be able to power your equipment. And we're talking about an emergency station. If you're using wind power only or as the primary source, you need to have a large amount of energy storage or battery storage for it to be effective. So that's considered a disadvantage. Moving right along. Phone operations and single sideband. So we have discussed SSB or single sideband ad nauseum during the technician class as well as the general class sessions. What we need to be aware of is that on the HF bands in amateur radio, the mode of communication when we are using voice or what we call phone communication that we typically use is in fact single sideband. It's one of the most used or commonly used modes of communication, SSB, single sideband. And again, we're just emphasizing, we have learned this before, but let's just emphasize what single sideband is. Remember when we transmit, well, first of all, single sideband is a form of amplitude modulation. With the amplitude modulation, you have your carrier and you have your upper sideband and your lower sideband. But for single sideband operation, what we do, we have circuitry that removes the carrier and removes one of the sideband, either the upper side or the lower side. And the reason is that all of the intelligence, the information is carried in one of the sidebands. So there's no need for the other sideband and there's no need for the carrier because all of your voice information is coming via one sideband. So you take away or you remove the carrier and you remove the other sideband, or we say we suppress them. We suppress the carrier and we suppress one of the sidebands. If we want to have lower sideband alone, we suppress the carrier and the upper sideband. If we want to have upper sideband, we suppress the carrier and we suppress the lower sideband, and that leaves just the upper sideband. So that is what single sideband is about, and that is how we achieve it, by that suppression. Now there's an advantage because we suppress the carrier and we suppress one of the sidebands. There's an advantage with any kind of single sideband operation compared to, let's say, the other types of analog voice modes. That is that you use less bandwidth. So imagine instead of using all of this bandwidth here, from this point to this point, we are just using this amount of bandwidth to carry the same amount of information in our voice. And therefore, we say that we're using less bandwidth when we use single sideband. Instead of all of this, we just use about half, just about this portion here, or this portion, either or for upper sideband or lower sideband. And because of that, we have also greater power efficiency. Instead of our amplifiers, instead of our transmitters having to work to transmit the carrier, as well as both sidebands, that same amount of power in our transmitter, we could use to power just one of the sidebands. So you have a better or greater power efficiency because all of the power in our transmitter is going to just the sideband alone. We're not transmitting the carrier. We're not doing the work to transmit the carrier. We're not doing the work to transmit the other sideband. All of the work is going, all of the effort and energy and power is going behind one of the sidebands. And therefore, because all of the power is going there, you have the greatest power efficiency. Imagine if you're using some of the power for the upper and the carrier, well, then you'll have less for that sideband. And therefore, the message is getting there, but with less power. So that's why SSB or single sideband operation uses less bandwidth and also has greater efficiency, greater power efficiency. So we just talked about single sideband. We have both upper sideband and we have lower sideband. We need to know for our exam, and a question that we can ask is, well, which one do we use? Do we use upper sideband? Do we use lower sideband? And if so, which one do you use and when do we use them? So we have a convention, and that convention is that upper sideband or USB is most commonly used for voice on frequencies of 14 megahertz or higher. So for example, bands such as the 17-meter band, the 12-meter band, and so on, Those are frequencies above 14. And I'll come with a short chart just now that could help you visualize all of these frequency bands and wavelengths together in one chart so that you can compare and contrast. But USB or upper sideband, the convention is to use it on frequencies above 14 megahertz. Also, USB or upper sideband is very much commonly used for SSB when we're on the VHF and UHF bands. Again, I have a little chart that will show those things. You may need to refresh maybe session 8 of the technician class has a nice session talking about the various bands and the frequency, the wavelength, and so on as to what is VHF, what is UHF, what is HF, and what is the 17-meter band, the 12-meter band, and the 20, and so on. But just know that the upper sideband USB is used anything above 14 megahertz, as well as in the VHF and UHF bands. So that leaves us with lower sideband. When do we use lower sideband? Well, we use lower sideband for, again, voice communication, but on frequencies such as the 160-meter band, as well as the 75-meter band, sometimes called the 80-meter band, and the 40-meter band. Those frequencies, those low frequencies, are where you use lower sideband by convention, and we consider it to be good amateur radio practice. It's really a convention that any frequency on the low part of it, and we'll come to a chart showing exactly where we use lower sideband and where we use upper sideband. But these are the points that you need to know for the exam, because this is how they'll present it to you. But we'll come with a short chart in a little while that shows you explicitly where USB is used and where LSB is used. But these are the points for your exam. Lower sideband is most commonly used for voice communication on the 160, 75, and 40-meter bands. And it is so because it is considered good amateur radio practice. So this is a chart. You don't need to learn it, but put it up there so that we can have a little reference point. You know, what is HF? What is VHF? What is UHF? What is 17 meters? What is 12 meters? Where is LSB used? Where is upper sideband used? So this is a chart. You can look at it on your own time, but we show that the lower frequencies between 1.8 and 2 megahertz, which is where amateurs can transmit, between 3.5 and 4 megahertz, again, amateurs has allocations there, between 7 megahertz and 7.3 megahertz. In other words, the 40-meter band, the 75-meter band, the 160-meter band, exactly what we just said in the last point, last bullet point. Remember, we said at 160 is 75-40. Let's convince ourselves. 160 is 75-40. Lower sideband, that's what our chart is showing. So those low frequencies here is where we use LSB. Everything above that, we use USB. So some person may say, but wait a minute, if I'm doing digital modes, I'm always on USB. That is also true. But for the purpose of our exams, this is what we need to know. The lower sideband is used for these low frequencies, 1.8 to 2 megahertz, 3.5 to 4 megahertz, 7.0 to 7.3 megahertz. And then upper sideband or USB is used for all of the other bands that we have access to as amateur radio operators if we're doing single sideband on any of them. And just again, FYI, remind ourselves what is HF, what is VHF, what is UHF. Remember, HF is between 3 and 30, VHF is between 30 and 300, and UHF is between 300 and 3000 megahertz. So a little chart that will hopefully put a compare and contrast on a reference point. Because sometimes when we have it as bullet points, it's kind of hard to place where things are relative to another. But hopefully this chart is helpful to you to understand, oh, okay, everything below 7 megahertz and so on is lower sideband. Anything above that is in fact going to be upper sideband. All right. So let's go here now. Phone operations and making a DX contact. So when we are calling for another amateur radio operator on the frequency, we turn our radio on and we're going to make contact with someone else. We want to make a call to another amateur radio operator. That is called, we refer to that as calling CQ. It's also the Morse code equivalent. If you're doing Morse code, it's CQ. That means you're calling someone else. So you turn to that vacant frequency and you're seeking a response from someone. And you call CQ. When you call CQ, someone may respond to you, and then you have a conversation, or what we call a QSO. You talk or you transmit and you exchange information. When you call CQ, you may have a local response. But what about if you want to call someone abroad, a foreign station, someone outside of your own country or someone outside of your own territory, far away? Well, you say CQDX for long distance. So you say CQDX when you are calling a foreign station or an external station. You're making a call for someone to answer you. You're saying, anyone out there? Is there anyone available to talk? And hopefully someone will answer you on that frequency. And if you want to specify that you want to talk to someone that's not close by, you want a challenge, you want to speak to someone way across the globe, you can say CQDX. So a foreign station will know, hey, that station operating, let's say in the United States, wishes to make a contact with someone in the Caribbean, or maybe someone in Asia, or someone in Africa, or someone in Oceania, or somewhere else around the world other than the continental US. And for the exam, we need to know that if a station within the US, 48 contiguous states, calls CQDX, what that means is that they're expecting a response from any station that's outside of the 48 states, meaning a foreign station or a station that's relatively far away or further away. That's if a person called CQDX. This you need to know for the exam. Remember, we are doing persons in the Caribbean who are studying this. Remember, we're doing US exams, so we have to learn it from the perspective of the FCC of the US. So we need to learn this point. Also, what if a conversation is in progress and we want to talk to persons who are already speaking? Well, you want to break into an existing phone conversation. Remember, every time we say phone in amateur radio, we mean voice. So we may want to make a phone contact or a voice contact. The recommended way to do so is to simply transmit. Of course, that is during the space, or when there's a pause in the other stations transmitting, there's a space. All you have to do is say your call sign once. That is one way to let others know that you wish to talk to them, or you need to break in or break into the conversation. You just simply give your call sign. So my amateur radio call sign is 9Z4RG, or phonetically 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. If France, let's say J69 Delta Sierra, is talking to John, and John's call sign I think is November Oscar X-ray Romeo Romeo, and both John and Franz are talking, and they have paused their transmission, or there's an over, they're going to the next person to talk. During that little brief pause, I can just key my transmit PTT, push to talk, and say 9 Zulu 4 Romeo Golf. That's all I need to do, and they will hear me, and they will acknowledge and bring me into the conversation. That's typically how it goes. So again, for the exam, if you want to break into an existing transmission, you need to know the recommended way is to say your amateur radio call sign once. Okay, last slide, folks. I know we run a little over, a couple extra slides, and also we had a little break in transmission. So really thank you for your time. This is our last slide for this evening. Of course, when we are using our radio as trained, certified, licensed amateur radio operators, it is expected that we know how to use our equipment. We have been trained. We need to know how to set our radios correctly, how to make the proper adjustments. As an amateur radio operator, and you want to make contact with another amateur radio operator, you just don't turn the radio on and start transmitting. There are some adjustments that you either need to make or that you need to verify. Because if you turn your radio off and you turn it on, you just need to double check to make sure that those settings, if you're using the same frequency band, for example, the same mode, you just need to verify that all those settings are as you left it, because someone else could have used the radio, maybe the values have been reset. So as an amateur radio operator, when you're going to use it, you need to make sure it's properly adjusted. Otherwise, you can cause interference, you can have a high SWR, you can damage your radio, your amplifier. So you just simply need to transmit. You need to make your proper settings before you use your radio and transmit. And there are a couple of settings that we will talk about now on this slide that you need to be aware of, and it's in your exam that you need to set. One is called the transmit audio or the microphone gain. That control, you need to adjust it properly so that your ALC is correctly set. And if you're doing single sideband or SSB transmission, you need to make sure that is properly set. Otherwise, you can have problems, as we had discussed. You could cause interference, you can sound horrible, you can sound terrible. You can damage equipment as well if some of these things are not properly set. So one of the settings that you have on your radio is your microphone gain, and you need to make sure that that is properly set. You're not overdriving and you're not underdriving, to make sure that the ALC is not exceeding when you're transmitting. You're not having too much ALC. Also, the other setting, if you're using hands-free operation, or VOX as it's called, voice operating control, meaning that you're not using your hand to press the push to talk and then speak. As you speak, the transmitter will just start to transmit. That is voice operated control, or VOX operations. That is a very nice feature of radio, and it allows you to have your hands free. So for example, you're transmitting, you're having a transmission, a conversation with another amateur radio operator, and as part of a licensed amateur radio operator operation is that you need to log, you need to write down the date and time and call signs of the other amateur radio operators, the mode that you're operating, the frequency that you're operating with them on. That's called a log. You're logging your contacts. As you speak with another amateur radio operator, you need to take a log of that, whether you're writing it down with pencil and paper, or whether you're typing it on a website, whether you're using local logging software. You need to log, and sometimes you do VOX so that your hands are freed to type or write down while you have your conversation. So you don't have to be pressing the push to talk, releasing it, and so on. You can be writing or typing, and that is VOX, or voice operated control operation. All of those are features of a radio. Notice here you have the VOX option, you have the microphone gain. So we're just showing it, making it real, showing what the transceiver is looking like. And screen, this screen of course does not match this particular transceiver, but of course the screen shows us some of the features that we've been discussing on this slide. So folks, we have come to the end of this evening's session. Again, I do apologize for the little glitch in the matrix where we fell off for about 5 minutes and had to come back on. Really do appreciate everyone coming back on to the session, and hopefully we'll have the 2 recorded sessions available. If for some reason it does not, I'll have to just re-record the session, but hopefully it has stuck, and we'll have the recording for persons to review, persons who might have missed today's sessions as well, to be able to review. So folks, please continue reviewing the previous level in case you need any information or clarification or revision. So if some of the theories that we're talking about today and we're referring to, we covered them in the technician class. If it's unclear to you, I encourage you to look over some of the previous sessions, and here's the link. We still have persons who are joining the class, and the way to get onto the distribution, email distribution list, for instance, to get all of the material, the schedule for the next date, as well as the link to join the session, the Zoom link, you go to this website here and you can sign up and you will get all of that information. So folks, God's willing, our next session will be Friday, the 20th of August, 2021. Our usual start time at 8:30 p.m. So everyone, thank you so much. Again, be safe, do have a great weekend, and all the best, everyone. Okay, thank you so much, John. 73 to you. Ramzan, good night. Certainly you're welcome. Okay, I'm seeing some questions there, Ramzan, and also Avin. So I will try to deal with those questions in the next session. Thank you so much. Okay, someone is signed as Goodwill. Not sure who that is. Thank you so much, Avin. Great to have you there. Appreciate the update as well. Yeah, cool. Sylvester, do have a good night. You're certainly welcome. Kevin, you're welcome as well. You too. Do have a good night. And Roger, good night as well. Thank you so much. And yeah, do have a great weekend, and we'll keep in touch. So folks, okay, Jessica, you are certainly welcome. Again, take good care. Thanks again. All right, everyone. So do have a good one, and take good care.